I'm joined by Jonny Goldstone, Managing Director of Green Tomato Cars. Thank you very much for joining me, Jonny.
Nice to meet you, Daniel. Thank you. You say tomato, I say tomato.
Hey, there you go.
But I have to tell you, we did have a go at setting up Green Tomato Cars in the States as well.
I read about
by
that.
the time I left the States, I was saying tomato, and all of our American customers were saying tomato, which was a sort of wonderful thing. So now things have gone full circle again.
Yeah, it's it gets very confusing after a while of hearing it one way, then start saying it another way. Sometimes I start saying tomato and privacy.
Sounds beautiful. Sounds beautiful the way you say it.
I'm a lot of people now, even though I'm from California, they think I'm Canadian because I have this sort of softer thing. So then I'm.
That's a whole other debate to get into, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's a better thing than being Californian or not. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, probably best to avoid it. And where are you taking this call from?
I am taking this call from our office, which is in Brentford, which, whether you know London or you don't know London, a lot of people don't know Brentford. It is on the western side of London, and actually the view out of my window, which I guess I could share with you for a second.
Yeah, if you'd like.
Might
it's
be
not going to mess up
crazy.
your...
The view out of my window is both the M4,
I know exactly where you are,
which is the motorway out to Heathrow, and the A4, which is the road underneath it. So whatever the traffic is doing in West London, we kind of know about it first, which is pretty handy.
I'm sure it is.
Being in the taxi industry as we are. And so, yeah, this is where our operations center is based.
That's a cool spot. I actually know exactly where that is. I've driven past that Audi dealership.
Yeah, the Audi dealership is cool, and even cooler is our office on the other side of the road, which if you drive by at night, you can see our logo on the wall. We're not allowed to advertise on the building, which is a shame because it would have been prime advertising space, but there you go.
So you just have a big logo inside.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's the way to get around that rule.
Exactly.
Yeah, very cool. And so you mentioned you're a taxi, and then one of the cool things is about Green Tomato Cars, and I would say probably the coolest thing about it in many ways, is that you have the largest zero emission fleet in London, or is it the UK?
In the universe.
In the universe, all right.
Potentially, according to our own research. But certainly in the UK, and as far as we're aware, actually anywhere, certainly in terms of hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles.
Yeah.
If we're looking at pure plug-in electric vehicles, I don't know if somebody somewhere has more, possibly in China, if they're running hundreds of electric vehicles there. And I know that there are some countries in Europe, for example, which have a lot of Teslas as taxis, which are heavily subsidized. Here, that's not an option in a commercially sustainable way, just because they're a bit too expensive. But yeah, we've embraced, really, ever since we started, whatever the newest technology is in terms of minimal emissions. So we were the first ones to use hybrids back in the day when people didn't know what they were. A lot of people still don't really know what they are. We were the first ones to have a plug-in hybrid. We actually retrofitted an extra battery pack into one of our first Toyota Prius 18 months before Toyota invited us to the unveiling of the first ever plug-in hybrid, which was cool. So we turned up in our plug-in hybrid and they go, hey, what's that? And then when commercially viable pure plug-in vehicles like the Renault Fluence and the BYD 6 came to market, we've tested all of those. And our commitment is to using the lowest emitting vehicle that's suitable for the job. So that does the job of transporting passengers from A to B. And at the moment, and maybe we'll get into it, whilst the electric vehicles, a lot of them are nice and the range has improved significantly, the charging infrastructure is still a major issue, and so is the cost to some extent. We've gone with hydrogen for the time being because the range and the charging time are both excellent, which in this industry are sort of, they are the must-haves before everything else.
It's a really good point because you're constantly, as a taxi driver, you're constantly on the move. You don't really have the opportunity to stop often.
Correct.
And actually, there's on your website, speaking of sharing screens before we started, you had that really cool little graph and chart that talks about the difference between charging times of like a regular. I can share my screen so we can take a look at that. Where would I find that? Do you remember off the top of your head?
Absolutely not at all. It may well be in one of our blogs,
Okay.
which is in the news section.
Yep. Okay, well, maybe I can click around while we're talking.
This is a really mean interview. You know, you're testing me on my own website as if I would know this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's in the news section. Yeah.
I will take a look. In the meantime, I wanted to know, how big is the fleet? Because last I saw, I think there was about 600.
Yes, so that's the overall fleet. That's made up of cars that we own,
okay,
and also cars on our network, which is a platform in a similar way in the concept to what Uber and Lyft have. So these are drivers who own their own cars, professional drivers in their own car. And if they are suitable for our model, so typically hybrid or plug-in, then we will allow them to work on our platform as well. And there are various advantages for those drivers to working with us compared to, say, Uber, most obviously in terms of the rates that we pay them, and also the sort of fact that they don't have drunk people being sick in the back of the car. So that's something that a lot of drivers like about working with us.
And they use their own cars in that?
So that side of the fleet are using their own cars, and then about half of the fleet is our own vehicles, so plug-in, hybrid, zero emission, that we either rent out to professional drivers or we provide to professional drivers who we employ to work solely for us. So that's it's quite a broad mix.
Okay.
Because essentially we want anyone who wants to drive an environmentally friendly car and who's going to provide a good level of customer service. If they want to drive for us, we want to have them on the team.
Makes sense. And why? I mean, why did you specifically say about the Uber drivers who don't want people being sick in the back of their car? Why won't that happen with Green Tomato cars?
We have a strict policy about not being sick in the back of the car. No, we have our target market is really B2B. So 90% of our customer base is corporate. And so typically to and from work, meetings, airports, that kind of thing. You would hope that they would be less likely to have had a few too many drinks. We do have a very loyal following of consumer clients as well, who again tend not to be the sort of people who are going to be a little the worse for wear at 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's not, the pub and club market isn't something that we really market to. You know, each to their own, and we understand that that market exists, but it's not our aspiration. And from having a sustainably or a commercially sustainable model as well as an environmentally sustainable model, it really doesn't suit what we're doing. I mean, if you look at Uber and the well-known fact that they lose billions of pounds a year, you know, it's all very well to get the customers in the car, but if you're doing that at unsustainable prices, then it's not of interest to a company that actually wants to be profitable.
Makes sense. I'm trying to think of which order to talk about this in, because the B2B part is really interesting. I guess. So what's really cool about Green Tomato Cars is that you are actually a carbon negative company.
That's right.
So how, it's because what I read is that you double offset all carbon emissions. So what does double offsetting mean? And I guess, what does offsetting mean, first of all?
So in terms of offsetting, and we work with a partner called Natural Capital Partners. So they are an offsetting organization. What we do is we measure the emissions from our operations. So
is that
predominantly our fleet. So the mileage, the emissions per kilometer, the emissions per mile multiplied by the number of miles that we do equals our emissions. That is not an absolutely guaranteed accurate figure because it's based on the manufacturer's cycles. So we weren't happy to say, well, we're just going to offset what the manufacturer guide numbers are. We know that those are prone to imperfection. So therefore, to make sure that we were being much more than conservative, we said, well, we will double that number. So for every 100 grams supposedly that are emitted based on the mileage figures for that vehicle type and year, we will offset 200 grams. So we will pay for schemes that will plant trees or enable carbon emission reduction in other parts of the world and locally as well, to do the equivalent of sequestering 200 grams of carbon for every 100 that we emit. So that's how we become, that's what offsetting is essentially, and that's how we become carbon neutral, or so negative rather.
So that's just the calculations of that must keep you busy, because if you have, let's say, 600 cars in your fleet, right? And then you have however many drivers with their own cars, do they need to, I mean, are you basically tallying up the amount of miles or kilometers they drive every?
So we are measuring the emissions of every vehicle on our fleet by reference to the distance that vehicle travels from when we accept a booking, or from when the driver accepts a booking. So we through our software can see the mileage that the driver covers when they accept a booking.
Got it.
And the mileage that they cover when they have the passenger in the car. So if it's one of the owner drivers who own their own vehicle, that's what we're going to be offsetting, the mileage that they've done, essentially covering one of our bookings. We're not covering all of their private mileage and everything else.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
When it's one of the vehicles that we own on our fleet, we have an option between all of the mileage or just the mileage that the driver is covering when they come out to work. So our drivers who take our vehicles also use those vehicles for their private use as well. They keep them, they don't return them to a depot. So we don't offset their private mileage, but all of the mileage that they do whilst they are working, whilst they are logged onto our system, whether it's on a live booking or not, we are monitoring, capturing that mileage, and therefore that's what we're offsetting.
And that's all done through a software of some sort.
Software database, and then
Makes sense. Yeah. I'm actually just laughing at myself because I'm not really sure why I thought that at the end of the year, you're going into every single car, turning it on, being like, oh, that's car 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have this many miles.
Thankfully not. Thankfully not.
That would be quite the job. And I'm really interested in the actual projects as well that you're working on. You mentioned planting trees, and I saw that you basically provide improved cook stoves in Uganda. Is that still a big project you're supporting?
So that's something that we've recently moved on to our next project. And I have to confess, I don't think we've updated the website with the new details. But this is water filtration and purification systems. And the biggest challenge, especially in the developing world, is drinkable clean water. Access to that and the energy intensity of achieving that. So that's something that we're working on now through Natural Capital Partners. So we will update the website and send you a link to that when it's done.
So and then also you do plant the 200 trees per year. And are those in London, or are they all over the UK?
So we do some local stuff. So within 2 miles of where we're working in local parks.
Cool.
And we'll sometimes, as part of that engagement and trying to be seen and be helpful in our community, we'll actually send out some staff volunteering to do that.
Nice.
And also some of the planting takes place further afield as well. So we're not too hands-on with that, but again, that's through a partner that knows what they're doing, and we're happy to let them get on with that, other than to the extent that they it's fun for our guys to go along and do a bit of volunteering from time to time.
That is nice. How I saw that you that if you transport a mother in labor to the hospital, you'll plant a tree and name it after the baby. How many times has that actually happened?
That probably now, I'd say there are 2 or 3 a year where that has happened.
Really?
So we were doing quite a lot up until 5 or 6 years ago, not because we've suddenly gone anti-mothers in labour, but because since the advent of Uber in the UK, our share of the consumer market has reduced quite significantly because Uber has massively reduced the pricing, and it's all become a bit of a race to the bottom. And we talked earlier that that's not really commercially sustainable. So we sort of said, okay, we're not going to play that game.
Yeah.
Which means we have fewer consumers using us than we used to. And obviously the number of mothers in labor are just going to be a proportion of that. So, but I would say over the 15 or so years we've been in business, there's probably 30 to 40 little trees that have been planted now.
Wow.
I don't know how easy it would be to find the earliest one that we did that was in our first year, but I'd like to think that's now grown somewhat.
Yeah, it should be.
And that's up in the Caledonian rainforest. So yeah, that's quite a cool thing. And we send a certificate to the parents, and people love that. So,
oh, that's so cool. That's such a great way to remember that
yeah.
day. That's super cool. The hydrogen fuel cars, which I've never actually been inside a hydrogen fuel cell car. How is it like really different? Can you tell the difference between that and, let's say, a hybrid like a Prius or an all electric car?
So in terms of the difference as a passenger experience, it's pretty minimal.
Okay.
With the cars that we run, so we run the Toyota Mirai.
Yep.
The current model of that car has a central console both between the front seats and the back seats. So there's only 2 passenger seats in the back. So in terms of the interior space, it feels a bit more like an executive car because you have your own space on the left side of the car and your own space on the right side of the car, and you can't sit a third person in between even if you wanted to. So yeah, we were talking about what it's like inside the Mirai. So the obvious thing is the display up at the front there on the dash that shows you, again, like an ordinary car, or especially like an electric vehicle, what your range is. But there's a sort of cool little schematic of how things are working, similar to the original Prius schematic. So yeah, it's not like, oh wow, this is a totally different thing, this isn't a car. It's actually pretty similar. And then obviously the ride experience is silent, similar to an electric vehicle, normal plug-in electric vehicle, and it's electricity either way, so you still get that slight sort of whir and whine as you pick up the torque. And then the other thing you would notice at the end of the journey, if you wanted to, there is actually a little button that allows the vehicle to discharge the water from the exhaust pipe. So what is being generated whilst you're doing the electrolysis to create the energy, the byproduct is H2O, and you can actually just press a little switch and that will dribble out the exhaust pipe like a sort of shower in a cheap hotel at the end of your journey. So that's the only other difference, really.
I found I'm going to share my screen here. I found it. So this is where it says, I'm not sure how big this is for you on the phone screen, but there's this little table in the middle of the blog post. So you're talking about the fuel cell electric vehicle, which is on the right. That's the hydrogen.
Yeah, correct.
And then BEV stands for battery, was it? Battery electric vehicle.
Yeah, battery electric, exactly.
And then you have your petrol or just standard fuel, or like gasoline.
Spot on.
And what's amazing is that with the battery, there are, like it says here, there are quite a lot of public charging points across London. It's just interesting that it takes 4 hours per 100 miles to charge, and the range.
Yeah, so that would be on a fast charge, as it says there at 7 kilowatts. Obviously, there are now rapid and super rapid chargers, but there just aren't anything like enough of them, and they're not in the right places. So I drive a battery electric vehicle for my commute, and the number of times I have needed to charge, there are plenty of apps that show you where the available chargers are, and you turn up at one and either somebody else is plugged in, or even more frustratingly, a normal internal combustion engine vehicle is just parked on it. And there is some enforcement, but it doesn't help me because I need to charge my car at that
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
So yeah, listen, it's early days still in this whole evolution of commercial and consumer vehicles. So that's something that's not surprising, but when you come to looking at what is going to be operationally viable for a business like us, it's just not something that we can live with.
Yeah. And that's what I find interesting is that the time it takes to get up and running is quite a while, considering that, you know, if you're driving a cab, you don't want to have that much downtime, and plus 100 to 150 miles, I imagine, even in London, I mean, going to and from Heathrow a few times, or Gatwick.
Correct. That's an average day. For one of our drivers, 100, 120 miles is an average day. Obviously, there'll be some who are doing significantly more and a few doing a bit less.
Yeah.
But if you're working, you know, pretty much as a professional driver, that's the sort of mileage you would expect to be doing on the days that you're working.
And that I'm basically building this up to the point where I think that the hydrogen fuel cell makes so much more sense. I mean, 3 to 4 minutes to refuel, which is almost the same time as just a regular petrol car. Plus, you can go 200 to 250 miles.
Well, in fact, I guess the numbers for both the battery and the fuel cell electric vehicles are slightly out of date already now. So our drivers in the same vehicle are now getting an average of 300 miles on a full tank.
With the hydrogen.
With the hydrogen, I think to be fair to the battery electric, you know, the range of some of those vehicles has definitely increased as well.
Makes sense.
And there are more vehicles available. But yeah, for a hydrogen fuel cell driver, they're maybe refueling twice or 3 times in a week. So that's taking very little time. The downside, to be absolutely candid, is that there are not hundreds or even tens of hydrogen refueling stations around London. There are 7 at the moment. And so clearly we had to take a view on whether that in itself was sufficient. The good news for us is they are located typically in fairly good accessible places compared to where our work either originates from or ends up at, especially near Heathrow Airport, and there is one at Gatwick Airport. So if we're picking you up from Heathrow, we can go and refuel quickly before we get you. If we're dropping you off at Heathrow, after we drop you off, we can go and refuel. And our drivers are going to Heathrow on average once a day at least. So refueling 2 or 3 times a week isn't going to be an issue.
Got it. It just seems like such I mean, maybe it's because the cost of the cars are much higher, at least on that. It was saying at the time it was £50,000 plus per car. So maybe that's why there aren't more of these hydrogen fueling stations. But it just seems to make more sense somehow to go.
Yeah, it's a real chicken and egg situation in terms of much more so in terms of the hydrogen rather than the battery. The stakeholders who you need to have in play are the manufacturers, the refueling stations, and all of the suppliers to them, and then somebody who's going to run the vehicle. And unless you get all 3 of those, you know, you can't have 2 without the third part. So actually, we've entered a consortium with refueling stations and with manufacturers in order to get everybody committed, so that all the chickens and all the eggs happen essentially at the same time, which I'm sure isn't biologically possible, but you know what I mean. And actually, as a template for innovation, where you've got a multifaceted, multi-stakeholder infrastructural requirement, it's been fantastic. It's been really impressive because we've all got the same goal, and we're all utterly dependent on one another, but we're all experts and specialists in completely different things. So this has brought us all together, like I say, all pulling in the same direction and knowing that the other one is there to be relied on. So I think there's a lot to learn for many different sectors and industries for how you can take this approach. And it takes people coming together right at the beginning and committing to something. But you know, that obviously makes sense if that commitment is there.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. I mean, we're all in this together, as you said. So it certainly does make sense to work together towards that common goal. And I mean, I imagine it's going to be. I'm sure every year it gets better and better, and we get closer and closer to achieving these goals. It's really just taking the time, being patient, really, I think. And
Yeah, listen, there is a clear investment of time and money and opportunity to make these things happen, especially at such early adoption stage.
yeah,
But if you believe in what you're doing, which we and our partners do, and you want to reap the benefits if it goes well, clearly there are benefits of being first, understanding the technology and how the marketplace has come about, and having a strong position in that place,
hmm
then that is the reward for taking the risk. So it's something we're really happy we've gone ahead with.
yeah. I think that's awesome. I was just remembered the question I wanted to ask earlier, which was, you're because you're double offsetting. I'm totally switching
Sure.
topics here. Is going back to the double offsetting is. Do any of your clients, the corporations, do they ask you for, how many miles that their employees have driven?
Yeah. So
Or
some of our clients are really really keen on this. We tend to have a split between of clients who are using our service in terms of the ecological background. Some of them are using us because they genuinely care.
hmm
Some of them are using us because they want to appear to genuinely care. And some of them just don't care, but they're using us purely because of the service or the price or whatever other reason.
hey, it
Um,
works. Whatever works.
so for the ones who genuinely care, that tends to be the most obvious way that we find out about it,
hmm
because actually they will be asking us for that information. Now we include that information on invoices and management information that we provide anyway on a journey by journey basis,
hmm
but there will be some customers who will ask for it in a different format or based on a different set of criteria that we will supply to them, because they're then going to take that information and put it in their own CSR reporting,
Right.
annual report and what have you. So yeah, we're directly feeding those numbers to them to then be able to report on the impact of their transport.
Yeah, exactly what I was curious to know is if, since you are doing so much, well, first of all, you're not, I imagine for most of your trips, you're not actually contributing any carbon as long as it's one of the all electric vehicles.
Yeah, yes, that's right. So actually, the cleaner our fleet gets, the less we offset. Um,
Oh, of
so,
course, yeah. Oh, it's
so
kind of
yeah,
counterintuitive in that way, isn't
it is a little bit,
it?
but that's because the less harm we're doing in the first place.
Yeah,
So that's a good thing.
that's cool. And so the data that the companies are looking for, I mean, you're saying that because you said, in addition to what's included on the invoice, some of these companies ask for more specific things or present it in another way. Is there any kind
Just the
of,
same information presented in a different way. So as procurement departments that we work with, and we're working with major organizations that will have large procurement departments, and they're not just looking at price, they're looking at quality of service,
yeah,
duty of care standards, all of that sort of thing. And so they'll be looking at a whole range of things from punctuality and performance metrics, waiting time. They love to know who are their top 50 employees who incur waiting time charges by booking a car and then not getting in it when they need it, and all that sort of thing. And so, as part of that whole suite of metrics, they'll also be looking at the emissions from those journeys. One of the really exciting things that we're now moving towards more is car sharing or ride sharing.
okay,
So that will be something else where they'll start to see even further both carbon savings but also financial savings, where we're enabling our passengers or our bookers to, especially on a company by company basis, to say, okay, if you can see two people who are going from the headquarters to the airport, or one's going to the airport and one's going somewhere to a hotel meeting near the airport, and they're traveling within 10 minutes of each other, then we're going to mandate that they travel together
mm,
unless they have a really strong reason not to. And that's something clearly that takes willpower and effort on the part of the client, but also we need the technology and the practical know-how to do that at our end as well. So that's something that we've always offered, The take-up has been actually much smaller than you would expect, but we're really sort of working hard to improve that functionality and make it easier for clients to mandate that across their business. There's actually quite a few moving parts to it that if they're not all there working, it becomes a bit of an obstacle to adoption.
Yeah, I can imagine the logistical planning around coordinating all of that is a bit mind-boggling. And what is, and this again, just switching topics completely, because I noticed on your website that you're ISO 14001 certified.
Right.
What is that? Because I've seen that before.
So ISO is an international standard, so like a benchmark for essentially good practice in business, best practice. ISO 14001 is the environmental performance plan that a business has. So ranging all across the business, from understanding the requirements of your stakeholders from an environmental perspective and how you meet those, to your supply chain and working with sustainable suppliers, through to what you do from a community perspective, what you do to train your staff, how you communicate externally as well as internally, metrics, a whole load of stuff. So we're monitoring the electricity consumption of our offices, all the way through to monitoring the offsetting, doing the offsetting, training staff to understand what it's all about, that kind of thing.
So that's I mean, that's a lot of stuff to keep track of, and you have to actually report on that. And there are people coming in who check on you, like
so
including your recycling.
Audit. You have an annual audit, and you have internal audits that we run monthly. We have quarterly management meetings to check that everything's on track. So yeah, there's quite a bit to it. It's one of those programs that sort of the more you do it, the more straightforward it becomes, because it becomes not just a routine, but it just becomes something that you are inherently better at.
Yeah.
The more that you're doing it. So yeah, it's quite a full undertaking. But now that we've been doing it, we've been ISO 14001 accredited for 10 years now. So it's sort of something that's relatively well entrenched in how we run the business.
Out of curiosity, were you excited when you first got the certification?
Oh yeah, it was like sort of sitting an exam. So you were sort of nervous and excited and then relieved, all in great measure. Yeah.
Is that something that you just do kind of more for yourself, or is there other benefits that end up coming as a result?
So both. You do it for yourself to actually make sure you're practicing what you preach. And there are absolutely clear commercial benefits to that nowadays, especially in the corporate marketplace that we operate in London. As part of any tender process for a large account, one of the requirements, expectations will be that you have an ISO accreditation. One of them will be that you have a fleet of hybrid or plug-in vehicles. So yeah, this is becoming very much part of the mainstream agenda for the corporate marketplace.
So it's almost like you can't really even do business without it, almost.
Almost not, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I'm conscious of time here, so I want to ask one of my favorite questions to inspire me and maybe anyone listening is, aside from running the green tomato or tomato cars and being super conscious about the exhaust that you put out into the world, plus, I mean, you're tracking everything. What do you do on a day-to-day basis? I mean, at home or even at the office to be environmentally friendly?
So on a personal level?
Yeah.
On a personal level, so I've certainly become much more mindful of waste in all formats. I think society is becoming ever more mindful of that. So I'm drinking my water.
I've been noticing that. Yeah.
Draw from the tap from my water bottle that I keep with me religiously.
He takes a drink.
Swig, slurp, and likewise the coffee cup. I drive a plug-in electric vehicle to and from work. Unfortunately, I have to commute that way because public transport takes me an hour and a half because of this particular journey. So it's an hour and a half on a good day, it's 2 hours on a bad day, and the the drive is 45 minutes. So that's a necessary evil, but at least it's a battery vehicle. And in fact, what's great, we recycle and everything. That's part of our ISO commitment, but also just good common sense. Printing as little as possible, really obvious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's really nice is I have 3 children, which in itself isn't that environmentally friendly, but they are aged currently between 3 and 10, and they are so aware of environmental issues, whether it's because the cartoons they're watching on TV are telling them all about recycling and reusing, or it's because they're genuinely interested in these issues. So that's quite nice. At home, they're sort of very into all of that stuff as well. So we are far from a sort of hippie family that is recycling and composting everything and only puts out 1 bag of garbage a year. I mean, I sort of hear those stories and try and understand how that can be possible, and it can't really fathom it. But I think we're trying to live a inverted commas good life. And in business and in your private life, the more efficient and economical you are about stuff, it's just a win-win anyway. So who wouldn't, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had no idea about these cartoons. That's really interesting.
Listen, Peppa Pig is a whole world awaiting.
Oh man. Yeah, that's I guess I'll have to start watching Peppa Pig now to get inspired.
I'd like to think this will come up in every podcast that you do from now on.
I hope so. I certainly do. And for the people who are listening, where can we find Green Tomato Cars if they want to book cars or start working with you on a corporate level? Where can we go to get updates as well?
So greentomatocars.com. Some people spell it with an E at the end of tomato, which we don't encourage. And we're on Twitter as Green Tomato Cars as well, and Facebook. So all the usuals, I would say.
Excellent.
Look forward to hearing from many of your listeners and subscribers.
I can't wait for them to all reach out to you as well.
Yes, just not all at the same time, but otherwise we look forward to it.
Once the logistics is ready, and then you can start taking all of them from one place to another.
Absolutely.
With the carpooling. Yeah. Awesome, Jonny. Well, thank you very much for your time. This was really interesting, and good luck. Keep up the great work with being the largest zero emission fleet in London.
Thanks a lot for your time. Great speaking with you.
Likewise. Hope you found that episode interesting. I thought it was great. As Jonny said, you can find out more on their website, greentomatocars.com, and you can follow them on their social media platforms at Green Tomato Cars. Pretty straightforward. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe so you can be the first to know about next episodes that we put out. And also visit us on our social media pages, especially Instagram. It's at Sustainability Matters Today. Thank you so much, and looking forward to speaking with you soon.